Have you ever seen a man worth $6 billion freeze in absolute terror? It doesn't happen often. Usually, money buys silence. But on a rainy Tuesday in Chicago, inside the city's most expensive restaurant, the silence was broken. A billionaire named Julian Sterling thought he could destroy a waitress for a simple mistake. He screamed, he humiliated her, and he laughed. But then, she looked him in the eye and whispered one sentence. Just one. And suddenly, the billionaire wasn't laughing anymore. What she said didn't just ruin his dinner, it ended his empire. This is the story of Andrew Jenkins, and the revenge that took 20 years to serve. The rain in Chicago has a way of sounding like loose change hitting the pavement, a constant rhythmic reminder that in this city, money is the only weather that matters. Inside the Obsidian, a restaurant so exclusive the phone number is unlisted, the rain was just a mute visual effect against the triple-paned bulletproof glass. The interior smelled of truffle oil, old leather, and fear. Andrew Jenkins adjusted her apron in the server's station, wincing as a sharp pain shot up her right calf. She had been on her feet for 10 hours. At 42, Andrew possessed a fading beauty, the kind that looks like a fine painting left out in the sun too long. Still elegant, but weary. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe bun, highlighting the high cheekbones that her mother used to say were her best feature. "Table 4 is yours, Andrew," the manager, Arthur Penhaligon, hissed. Arthur was a man who sweated even when the air conditioning was set to Arctic. He was terrified of his clientele, and tonight he had a reason to be. "And for God's sake, fix your collar. If this goes south, I'm not just firing you, I'm blacklisting you from every eatery in Illinois." Andrew nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she smoothed the fabric. "Who is it, Arthur?" Arthur wiped his forehead with a pristine handkerchief. "Julian Sterling." Andrew's breath hitched. The name landed in the pit of her stomach like a stone. Julian Sterling, the real estate mogul, the man who had recently acquired the contract to bulldoze the Southside Community Center to build luxury condos. He was known in the press as the King of Steel, but in the service industry, he was known simply as the Butcher. He didn't just complain about service, he dismantled human beings for sport. "I can handle him," Andrew said, though her voice lacked conviction. "You have to," Arthur snapped. "He's requested the 1982 Waitress. Do not screw up the decanting." Andrew walked out onto the floor. The restaurant was dimly lit, the tables separated by velvet dividers to ensure privacy for the affairs, bribes, and mergers happening over Wagyu beef. Julian Sterling sat at the prime table near the window. He looked exactly like his photos in Forbes, perhaps even more predatory in person. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair slicked back and a jawline that looked like it could crush granite. He was wearing a navy bespoke suit that likely cost more than Andrew's annual rent. Opposite him sat a woman who couldn't have been older than 25. She was scrolling through her phone, looking bored. Her name, according to the tabloids, was Tiffany, or maybe Brittany. Julian cycled through them so fast it was hard to keep track. Andrew approached the table, the bottle of Waitress cradled in her arm like a newborn. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling. The 1982 Waitress you requested," Andrew said, her voice steady. Julian didn't look up. He was staring at a document on the table, a gold fountain pen hovering over a signature line. "Just pour it. And don't hover. I hate it when you people hover." "You people." The phrase stung, but Andrew was a professional. She had raised 2 kids on tips and patience. She placed the glasses on the table. "Is the temperature correct?" Julian barked, finally looking up. His eyes were a piercing, icy blue, eyes that assessed value and found everything wanting. It has been decanted for 45 minutes, sir. It should be perfect, Andrew replied. Julian sneered. I didn't ask what it should be. I asked if it is. He turned to his date. You see this? Distinct lack of competence? This is why the unemployment rate is what it is. No attention to detail. The young woman giggled, a hollow sound. You're so bad, Julian. I'm exacting, he corrected. He waved his hand dismissively at Andrew. Pour. Andrew began the ritual. The wine, a deep, blood-red vintage, began to flow into the crystal glass. She focused entirely on the liquid, blocking out the condescending look on his face. Then, it happened. Julian's phone buzzed violently on the table, a harsh, vibrating rattle against the fine china. It startled him. He jerked his arm to grab it, his elbow flying outward with aggressive speed. His elbow connected hard with Andrew's wrist. The bottle didn't fall, but the angle shifted violently. A darkly crimson wave of 1982 Waitress, worth $5,000, splashed out of the glass. It didn't hit the tablecloth. It didn't hit the floor. It hit Julian Sterling directly in the chest. The red liquid soaked instantly into the crisp white dress shirt and the navy lapel of his $50,000 suit. For 3 seconds, the entire restaurant went silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. The low murmur of conversation died. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Andrew stood frozen, the bottle still in her hand, watching the red stain spread like a gunshot wound across his chest. Julian looked down at his chest. Then he looked up at Andrew. The vein in his forehead began to throb. You, Julian whispered, the word escaping like steam from a pressure cooker. Arthur, the manager, was already sprinting across the dining room, his face pale as a sheet. Mr. Sterling, oh my God, Mr. Sterling. But he was too late. The explosion had already begun. Julian Sterling stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. He towered over Andrew, his face turning a shade of purple that matched the wine. You stupid, incompetent cow, he bellowed. The insult echoed off the high ceilings. Diners at other tables turned, eyes wide. In high society Chicago, scenes were avoided at all costs, but Julian Sterling didn't care about social etiquette. He owned the building. Mr. Sterling, please, it was an accident. Andrew tried to speak, her voice trembling. An accident? Julian roared, grabbing a napkin and furiously scrubbing at his lapel, which only smeared the wine further. This suit is vicuña wool. Do you have any idea what this costs? You could work for 10 lifetimes and not afford the buttons on this jacket. Sir, Shut up! He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. I don't want to hear your excuses. I want you fired. No, I want you destroyed. I want to make sure you never work in this city again. He turned to Arthur, who had arrived and was practically hyperventilating. Arthur, get this trash out of my sight and send me the bill for this suit. I'm deducting it from your lease renewal. Yes, Mr. Sterling, absolutely, right away, Arthur stammered, grabbing Andrew's arm roughly. Andrew, leave. Now, go to the office and pack your things. But Julian wasn't finished. The humiliation wasn't enough for him yet. He needed to crush her spirit. He stepped closer to Andrew, invading her personal space. The smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the metallic scent of the spilled wine. Look at you, Julian sneered, his voice dropping to a cruel, venomous hiss that carried through the silent room. You're nothing. You're a tray carrier. A nobody. You exist to serve people like me, and you can't even do that right. You are a waste of space. He laughed, a cold, barking sound. I bet you go home to some miserable little apartment and complain about how unfair the world is. Well, guess what? It is unfair. Because I'm up here, and you're down there in the dirt, and that is where you will stay." Andrew looked at him. The tears that had been threatening to spill suddenly evaporated. The fear in her chest vanished, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. She looked at the red stain on his chest. She looked at his cruel, arrogant eyes. She remembered. She pulled her arm out of Arthur's grip. She stood up straighter, her posture shifting from that of a servant to something regal. "Are you deaf?" Julian spat. "Get out!" Andrew took one step forward. She was now inches from him. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She locked eyes with him, her gaze piercing through his bluster. She opened her mouth and spoke clearly, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor blade. "I suggest you worry less about your suit, Julian, and more about the fact that your signature on the Meridian Project documents is a forgery." The reaction was instantaneous. Julian's face went from purple to a ghostly, ash-grey white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes darted to his date, then to Arthur, then back to Andrew, widening in genuine, primal horror. The young woman, Tiffany, looked confused. "Julian, what is she talking about?" Julian didn't answer. He couldn't breathe. The Meridian Project was his crown jewel, a $1 billion government contract he had secured 3 days ago. It was supposed to be ironclad. It was supposed to be secret. "Who?" Julian rasped, his voice a broken squeak. "Who are you?" Andrew picked up a napkin from the table. She calmly reached out and dabbed a drop of wine from his tie, a gesture of mocking service. "My name is Andrew," she said softly, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "But 20 years ago, before you bankrupt my father and stole his patents to build your empire, my name was Andrew Galloway." She dropped the napkin on the table. It landed with a soft thud that felt like a gavel striking a podium. "And I have the original hard drives, Julian." Andrew turned around, unbinding her apron. She dropped it on the floor next to the stunned manager, Arthur. "I quit," she said. She walked toward the exit, her heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. Behind her, the King of Steel collapsed into his chair, clutching his chest, gasping for air as if the ghost of the man he destroyed had just walked into the room and punched him in the throat. The restaurant remained silent, save for the sound of the rain, which suddenly sounded less like loose change and more like applause. The heavy oak doors of the Obsidian swung shut behind Andrew, muffling the chaos she had left inside. The cool night air of Chicago hit her face, mixing with the rain. But she didn't shiver. She felt hot, electrified by the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She didn't run. Running attracts attention. She walked calmly to the valet stand, where a young man named Leo was huddled under an umbrella. "Leaving early, Andrew?" Leo asked, surprised to see her before midnight. "Retiring, actually," Andrew said, a small, cryptic smile playing on her lips. "Leo, keep the ticket. I'm taking a cab." She walked past the line of Bentleys and Porsches to the street corner and hailed a yellow taxi. As she slid into the back seat, her demeanor shifted instantly. The tired waitress vanished. In her place sat a woman with the precision of a military tactician. She pulled a burner phone from her purse, a cheap plastic flip phone that looked like a relic from 2005. She dialed a number from memory. It rang once. "Did you do it?" a male voice asked on the other end. Rough, tired, but alert. "It's done," Andrew replied, watching the city lights blur past the wet window. "I dropped the Galloway name. He knows. He's panicked. You poked the bear, Andrew. Now the bear is going to tear the city apart looking for you." "Let him," Andrew whispered. "I'm not the prey anymore, Michael. I'm the hunter. I'm heading to the safe house. Upload the first packet." She snapped the phone shut and removed the SIM card, crushing it between her thumb and forefinger before dropping the pieces onto the floor mat of the taxi. Back inside the restaurant, the atmosphere had shifted from awkwardness to terror. Julian Sterling was no longer shouting. He was sitting in the spilled wine, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Get out," Julian said to Tiffany. "But Julian, Get out!" he screamed, his voice cracking. Tiffany grabbed her purse and fled, followed closely by the terrified waitstaff. Arthur, the manager, stood trembling by the kitchen door. "Close the restaurant, Arthur," Julian said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "Lock the doors. Turn off the cameras. Now." As soon as the room was cleared, Julian pulled out his encrypted smartphone. His hands, usually steady enough to sign billion-dollar checks, were shaking so bad he hit the wrong icon twice. He finally dialed a number labeled simply, "Victor." "Mr. Sterling." The voice was deep, accented, and devoid of emotion. Victor Krov was not a lawyer. He was the man Julian called when lawyers couldn't fix the problem. He was the head of Sterling Global's Asset Protection Unit, a euphemism for a private paramilitary squad. "I have a situation," Julian said, staring at the empty chair where Andrew had stood. "A waitress, Andrew Jenkins. She knows about Galloway." There was a pause on the line. Even Victor, a man who had seen everything, was silent for a beat. "Galloway. That file has been buried for 2 decades. The father is dead." "The daughter isn't," Julian hissed. "She's been working here, right under my nose. She claims she has the hard drives, Victor. The original source code for the Meridian project." "If she has the source code, she can prove the patent theft," Victor said analytically. "The government contract will be voided. You will be indicted for fraud and industrial espionage. The company stock will hit 0 by morning." "I know the consequences," Julian roared, standing up and pacing the empty restaurant. "Find her. I don't care what it costs. I don't care who you have to bribe or hurt. Find her, get the drives, and make sure she never speaks again." "Do you have an address?" "HR files. I'm breaking into the manager's office right now." Julian kicked open the door to Arthur's office, startling the manager who was cowering behind his desk. Julian grabbed the employee file cabinet and ripped it open. Jenkins! He flipped through the files frantically. He found it. Andrew Jenkins. 402 Elm Street, apartment 4B. 402 Elm Street, Julian barked into the phone. "I have a team 5 minutes away," Victor replied. "Consider it handled." Julian hung up and slumped against the wall. He looked at his reflection in the office window. He looked old. 20 years ago, Robert Galloway had been a genius inventor with a revolutionary algorithm for compressing data. The Galloway key. Julian had been the shark who offered to fund him. Instead, Julian had buried him in legal fees, stole the patent filings, and claimed the invention as his own. Robert Galloway had lost his house, his reputation, and finally, his hope. He had been found hanging in a motel room 6 months later. Julian had forgotten about the daughter. She was just a kid in a black dress at the funeral, crying silently. He hadn't even learned her name. He should have paid closer attention. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour. At 402 Elm Street, a run-down brick building in a forgotten corner of Chicago, a black SUV idled at the curb with its lights off. 4 men stepped out. They wore black tactical gear, indistinguishable from a SWAT team, but with no badges. They moved with silent, lethal precision. They breached the front door of the apartment building with a crowbar, the sound masked by a clap of thunder. They moved up the stairs to apartment 4B. Victor Krov stood at the back, listening to the comms in his ear. "Status? At the door," the lead operative whispered. "Breaching in 3, 2, 1. The door was kicked in. The team flooded the room, weapons raised, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Clear left, clear right. Bedroom clear. Kitchen clear. Victor walked into the apartment a moment later. It was a small, cramped space. There was a bed, a dresser, and a cat waiting expectantly by an empty food bowl. But there was no Andrew. Victor walked to the dresser. It was empty. He checked the closet. Empty. No clothes, no shoes, no personal items. He walked to the kitchen. On the small wooden table, there was a single object, a laptop. It was open and running. Victor approached it cautiously. On the screen was a live video feed. It showed the interior of apartment 4B. It showed the tactical team standing around with their guns. It showed Victor's face, looking at the screen. Victor froze. He looked up at the corner of the ceiling. A tiny hidden camera blinked red. She knew, Victor whispered. Suddenly, the text on the laptop screen changed. A terminal window popped up, green text scrolling rapidly against a black background. Hello, Victor. Tell Julian he can't erase the past. Check your email. Victor's phone buzzed. He pulled it out. An email had just been sent to the general inbox of the Chicago Tribune, the New York Times, and the FBI Cybercrimes Division. The subject line read, Evidence of fraud. The Sterling Galloway theft. Victor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. He picked up his phone and dialed Julian. Did you get her? Julian asked, his voice full of desperate hope. It's a trap, sir, Victor said, his voice grim. The apartment was a decoy. She was never living here. Or if she was, she cleared out days ago. She was waiting for us. What do you mean, waiting? She has a live feed. She saw us break in. And, sir, she just leaked the first data packet. Stop it! Julian screamed. Hack the servers. Kill the email. It's already out, Victor said. But that's not the worst part. What could be worse? The email. It was just the introduction. It says, Part 1 of 10. She's dripping the information. She's not just exposing you, Mr. Sterling. She's torturing you. She wants you to watch your empire burn slowly. Across town, in the basement of an old bookstore in Wicker Park, Andrew Jenkins sat in a comfortable leather chair. The smell of old paper and coffee surrounded her. Sitting opposite her was Michael Ross. Once a Pulitzer-winning investigative journalist, Michael had been blacklisted 5 years ago for flying too close to the sun, coincidentally, on a story involving one of Julian Sterling's subsidiaries. He was messy, cynical, and drank too much cheap whiskey, but he was the best researcher Andrew had ever known. You see that? Andrew pointed to the monitor set up on the desk. Victor Krov, ex-KGB, current thug for hire. He took the bait. Michael took a sip from a flask. You realize what you've done, Andrew. Krov isn't a lawyer. He kills people. If they find this place... They won't, Andrew said calmly. I spent 10 years building the firewall protecting this location. It's routed through servers in Estonia, Singapore, and a toaster in Ohio. They can't trace us. So, the email is sent, Michael said, looking at the screen. Phase 1 is complete. The media will wake up to a nice little scandal tomorrow. Stock drops 10%, maybe 15%. Julian issues a denial. Then what? Andrew leaned forward, the light from the screens illuminating her face. She looked younger now, the fatigue of the waitress job replaced by a terrifying vitality. Julian thinks this is about the patent, Andrew said. He thinks I just want money or to clear my father's name. He thinks if he throws enough lawyers at the patent office, he can stall. Is he wrong? Dead wrong, Andrew smiled. The patent is the distraction. The Meridian project isn't just a government contract for infrastructure, Michael. It's a surveillance grid. And my father didn't just write the compression algorithm, he wrote a back door. Michael's eyes widened. A back door into the Department of Defense's new grid. Yes. Julian sold a system to the US military that he doesn't control. I do. Andrew tapped the table. I have the keys to the castle, and I'm not just going to prove Julian stole the tech. I'm going to demonstrate that the King of Steel sold a compromised weapon to the White House. Michael let out a low whistle. That's treason. They won't just arrest him. They'll bury him under the prison. Exactly, Andrew said cold. He took 20 years of my life. I'm going to take the rest of his. Suddenly, a red alert bar flashed on the bottom of Andrew's middle monitor. Proximity. Alert. Perimeter breach. Sector 4. Andrew's smile vanished. What is that? Michael asked, standing up. Sector 4 is the alley, Andrew said, typing furiously. Someone just tripped the laser sensor. A stray cat? No, Andrew said, bringing up a grainy black and white feed from the alley camera. Cats don't wear night vision goggles. On the screen, two figures were moving silently toward the back entrance of the bookstore. They weren't Victor's men. They were different. Lighter gear. Faster. How? Andrew whispered. How did they find us? We need to go, Michael said, grabbing his hard drive. Now, Andrew. Wait. Andrew zoomed in on the image. One of the figures stopped and looked directly up at the camera. He raised a hand and waved. Andrew gasped. She recognized the tattoo on his wrist, a black scorpion. It's not Julian, Andrew realized, horror dawning on her face. Julian is too stupid to find us this fast. He called in a favor. From who? The Syndicate, Andrew said, shutting down the servers with a master kill switch. We have to run. If the Syndicate is involved, Julian just sold 51% of his soul to the devil to get me. She grabbed her coat and the primary drive. Out the storm drain. Go! As they scrambled toward the hidden trap door in the floor, the back door of the bookstore exploded inward. The storm drain beneath Wicker Park smelled of rust, stagnant water, and decay. It was a sensory assault, but for Andrew and Michael, it was the only lifeline left. They waded through knee-deep water, the only light coming from the waterproof tactical flashlight Andrew had snagged from her emergency kit. My hard drive, Michael gasped, clutching the device to his chest as he slipped on a patch of moss. If this gets wet, we lose the encryption keys for the next packet. Keep moving, Andrew whispered, her voice echoing strangely against the concrete tunnel. The Syndicate doesn't check storm drains. They're high-tech mercenaries, not sewer rats. We have maybe 20 minutes before they grid search the block. Who are they, Andrew? Michael asked, his breath coming in ragged bursts. I know bad guys. I know the mob. But those guys back there, they moved like ghosts. Andrew stopped at a junction in the tunnel. She checked a laminated map she had taped to the inside of her coat. They're called the Vanguard, Andrew said grimly. They're a private intelligence firm. They don't exist on paper. Usually, they work for dictators or oil conglomerates to suppress uprisings. If Julian hired them, he didn't just write a check. He gave them something valuable. What could Julian possibly have that they want? Andrew looked at Michael, her face shadowed. Access. The Meridian Project isn't just about buildings. It grants top-level clearance to city infrastructure, power grids, traffic lights, emergency response channels. Julian just handed the keys to Chicago to a paramilitary group in exchange for my head. Meanwhile, in a penthouse suite overlooking the Chicago River, far away from the chaos at the restaurant or the bookstore, Julian Sterling sat opposite a man who made him feel very small. The man was named Cyrus Vane. He was younger than Julian, perhaps 40, wearing a suit that was tailored but unbranded. He sat with a stillness that was unnatural, sipping sparkling water while Julian paced frantically. "Your men missed her," Julian snapped, pouring himself a scotch with trembling hands. "I pay you $10 million a retainer, and you let a waitress slip down a drain." Cyrus Vane didn't blink. "She isn't a waitress, Julian. You really should have done your due diligence 20 years ago." Andrew Galloway spent the last decade working as a systems architect for encryption firms in Europe before she came back here. She's not hiding. She's operating. "I don't care about her resume." Julian threw his glass against the wall. It shattered, leaving a wet stain that reminded him of the wine incident. "I want her dead. She's releasing the files. The stock dropped 12% in after-hours trading. The board is calling for an emergency meeting at 8 a.m. If she releases the next packet, I'm finished." Cyrus set his water down gently. "The next packet contains the proof that you bribed Senator Thorne to get the Meridian contract, doesn't it?" Julian froze. "How do you know that?" "I know everything, Julian. That's why you hired me." Cyrus stood up and walked to the window. "We will catch her. She's smart, but she has limited resources. We have the city's traffic cameras, facial recognition, and thanks to the access you gave us, the thermal imaging satellites." "Good," Julian breathed. "Kill her." "The price has gone up," Cyrus said casually. "What? We had a deal." Cyrus turned, his eyes dead and cold. "The deal was for a waitress with a grudge. This is a cyber-terrorist with state secrets. The price is now 51% of Sterling Global." Julian felt like he'd been punched. "You want controlling interest in my company? You're insane. I built this empire." "And you are currently burning it down," Cyrus replied. "You have two choices, Julian. You can keep 49% of a company that survives this week, or you can own 100% of a company that ceases to exist by tomorrow noon when the FBI raids your home. Decide." Julian looked at the city lights. He looked at the shattered glass on the floor. He thought about the prison cell waiting for him. "Fine," Julian whispered. "A broken man. Get it done. Just stop her." Andrew and Michael emerged from a maintenance hatch inside a subway station 3 miles away. They were wet, smelling of ozone and grime, blending in perfectly with the late-night commuters who were too tired to care. They hopped a turnstile and boarded the Blue Line train heading toward O'Hare Airport. "Where are we going?" Michael asked, huddled in the corner seat, trying to dry his laptop with his jacket. "The airport is suicide. Facial recognition will flag us instantly." "We aren't going to the airport," Andrew said. She pulled out a tablet she had stashed in her go bag. "We're going to the one place Julian won't look, the one place his ego won't let him consider." "Where?" "The site of the old Galloway research lab," Andrew said. "The building he condemned, the one he's scheduled to demolish tomorrow for the groundbreaking ceremony of the Meridian Tower." "We're going to the construction site?" Michael hissed. "That's right in the belly of the beast." "Exactly," Andrew tapped the screen. "There's a hardline connection in the basement of the old lab. It's an analog line, copper wire. It's not connected to the modern grid. Cyrus can't track it, and he can't hack it. From there, I can upload the final blow." "Andrew," Michael grabbed her wrist. "What is the final blow? You said the patent theft was just the start." Andrew looked out the train window as the dark tunnel rushed by. "The patent theft destroys his reputation," she said softly. "The bribery destroys his freedom. But the final packet, it destroys his legacy. It proves that the foundation of his new tower, the one he's breaking ground on tomorrow, is geologically unstable. He faked the safety reports. If he builds that tower, it will collapse within 5 years." Michael stared at her. "He's willing to kill thousands of people just to build a monument to himself?" He killed my father for less, Andrew said. Tomorrow, the world sees the monster behind the suit. The morning of the groundbreaking ceremony was grey and overcast, the Chicago sky threatening rain once again. A massive stage had been erected on the empty lot where the old community center and the Galloway lab once stood. Huge banners displaying Sterling Global, building the future, flapped in the wind. Despite the overnight scandal and the dipping stock price, Julian Sterling was determined to brazen it out. He stood backstage, a team of makeup artists frantically trying to cover the dark circles under his eyes. "The press is asking about the email leak," his PR manager, a terrified woman named Jessica, whispered. "They're asking about the forgery." "Lies," Julian rehearsed, adjusting his tie. A new one, since the wine-stained one was in the trash. "Disgruntled employee, mental health issues. We are filing a defamation suit." "Sir, the FBI has requested a comment." "Tell them to talk to my lawyers," Julian snapped. He checked his phone. No word from Cyrus. That meant Andrew was still out there. But he had to go on stage. He had to project strength. If he showed weakness now, the investors would bolt. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Julian Sterling," the announcer boomed. Julian plastered on his $1,000,000 smile and walked out onto the stage. A crowd of reporters, city officials, and paid applause fillers waited. But the vibe was wrong. The reporters weren't smiling. They were checking their phones, whispering, looking up at him with shark-like anticipation. "Thank you," Julian waved. "Today is a historic day. We break ground on the Meridian Tower, a symbol of Chicago's resilience." As he began his speech, Andrew Jenkins was 3 stories below his feet. She and Michael were in the sub-basement of the scheduled-for-demolition building. The room was shaking from the heavy machinery moving above them. Dust fell from the ceiling. Andrew had spliced her laptop into a thick bundle of copper wires protruding from a rusted junction box. "I'm in," Andrew said, typing furiously. "I've bypassed the external firewall. I'm patching into the event's AV system." "Hurry," Michael said, looking at the ceiling nervously. "They start drilling in 10 minutes. If we're here when the pile drivers start." "I just need 30 seconds, Andrew said, uploading the audio file and hacking the Jumbotron. Above ground, Julian was hitting his stride. "Some have tried to tear us down with baseless accusations," he bellowed into the microphone. "But I stand here with nothing to hide. My legacy is built on transparency." Suddenly, the massive LED screen behind him flickered. The image of the rendering of the new tower vanished. Static filled the screen. A screech of audio feedback tore through the speakers, making everyone cover their ears. Julian turned around, confused. "What is this? Cut the feed." But the feed didn't cut. Instead, a video appeared. It wasn't a sleek, produced video. It was grainy footage from a security camera. It was dated October 14th, 2003. The crowd gasped. On the screen, a younger Julian Sterling was sitting in an office. Sitting across from him was a man who looked tired and desperate. Robert Galloway, Andrew's father. The audio was crisp. "Please, Julian," Robert Galloway begged on the screen. "The compression algorithm isn't ready. If you launch it now, it will corrupt the data. It's dangerous. Hospitals use this data. If it fails, people die." On screen, Julian laughed. He leaned back, smoking a cigar. "I don't care about the hospitals, Bob. I care about the IPO. We launch on Monday. If the data corrupts, we'll sell them the patch to fix it. That's double the profit." "I won't let you," Robert said, standing up. "I'm going to the press." Julian's face on the screen turned dark. "You do that, Bob, and I'll bury you. I'll take your house, I'll take your patent, and I'll leave that little girl of yours on the street. Do we understand each other?" The video froze on Julian's cruel, younger face. Silence descended on the construction site. It was heavier than the silence in the restaurant. This wasn't just rudeness. This was a confession of sociopathic greed. Julian stood on stage, paralyzed. He felt like he was naked. He looked at the crowd. The city officials were backing away. The reporters were typing furiously. Then Andrew's voice boomed over the speakers. She wasn't on the screen, but she was speaking live from the basement. He didn't just steal the future, Chicago. He endangered it. The screen changed again. This time, it showed a geological survey report. It was stamped, rejected, high risk of liquefaction. The ground you are standing on, Andrew's voice continued, echoing like the voice of God, cannot support the weight of the Meridian Tower. Julian bribed the inspector to hide this report. If he pours that concrete today, the subway tunnels below will collapse. The crowd panicked. People started screaming and running off the dirt lot. The VIPs scrambled for their limos. Julian stood alone on the stage, screaming into a dead microphone. "It's a lie! It's deep fake! She's lying!" But nobody was listening. In the shadows of the VIP tent, Cyrus Vane watched the screen. He tapped his earpiece. "Abort," Cyrus said calmly. "The asset is toxic. Terminate the contract with Sterling." "What about the girl?" his operative asked. "She won. We don't fight ghosts. Pull the team out." Cyrus turned and walked away, leaving Julian to the wolves. Below ground, Andrew closed her laptop. "It's done." Michael let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 20 years. "You did it, Andrew. You killed the king." "Not yet," Andrew said, packing up. "Now comes the hard part. Now we have to survive the fallout." Suddenly, the door to the sub-basement burst open. But it wasn't the syndicate. It was the FBI. "FBI, hands in the air!" Andrew raised her hands, a calm look on her face. She had expected this. She wasn't running anymore. The sub-basement of the old Galloway lab didn't have windows, but Andrew could feel the change in the atmosphere. The air, previously thick with the stale dust of demolition, was now vibrating with a new kind of energy. It wasn't the rumble of construction machinery anymore. It was the rhythmic, heavy thud of boots. Lots of them. Above her, the world was in chaos. The video she had broadcasted, the grainy footage of a young Julian Sterling admitting to fraud and reckless endangerment, was playing on a loop on the Jumbotron, searing itself into the retinas of every reporter, city official, and construction worker in Chicago. But down here, in the dark, Andrew sat in silence. She closed her laptop. She didn't try to run. There was no point. The back door she and Michael had used was already compromised. Besides, running was what guilty people did. Andrew Galloway was done hiding. "Andrew!" Michael hissed, his face pale in the glow of the emergency lights. "We have to move. The service tunnel is still open. We can make it to the river." Andrew shook her head slowly. She reached into a bag and pulled out a small, encrypted USB drive, the master key to everything she had just released. She placed it in the center of the rusted metal table. "Go, Michael," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You're a journalist. If they catch you down here, they'll bury you in legal fees. If you're on the outside, you can write the story. You can make sure they don't spin this." "I'm not leaving you," Michael protested, grabbing his backpack. "You have to," Andrew said, looking him in the eye. "The story needs a narrator." "Go." Michael hesitated, looking at the trap door, then back at Andrew. He saw the resolve in her eyes, the same steel that had allowed her to pour wine for a man who destroyed her family without shaking. He nodded once, a sharp, painful jerk of his chin, and disappeared into the shadows of the service tunnel. 10 seconds later, the steel door to the sub-basement was blown off its hinges. "Federal agents, drop to the ground, now!" The room flooded with blinding white light from tactical flashlights. Red laser sights danced across Andrew's chest and forehead. The sound was deafening, shouting, the clatter of gear, the heavy breathing of adrenaline-fueled men. Andrew didn't flinch. She slowly raised her hands, palms open. She didn't drop to the ground. She stood tall, a waitress in a dirty coat facing down the barrel of the United States government. "Do not shoot," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I am unarmed. The evidence is on the table." 2 agents rushed her, spinning her around and slamming her against the cold concrete wall. The handcuffs clicked shut, cold, hard, and final. "Andrew Jenkins, you are under arrest for cyber-terrorism, unauthorized access to federal systems, and incitement of panic," an agent barked, reading her rights. Andrew rested her forehead against the wall. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 20 years, she didn't have to worry about the next shift. She didn't have to worry about the rent. It was over. One hour later, Midway International Airport. While Andrew was being shoved into the back of an armored van, Julian Sterling was sprinting across the tarmac of a private airfield on the south side of the city. The rain had started again, a cold drizzle that slicked his silver hair to his skull. He looked manic. His tie was gone. His $5,000 suit was splattered with mud. He was clutching a briefcase filled with bearer bonds and 3 different passports. "Start the engines!" he screamed into his phone. "Damn it, Reynolds, I said start the jet!" He reached the stairs of his Gulfstream, G-50. He scrambled up the steps, slipping on the wet metal, barking orders at a pilot who wasn't there. When he breached the cabin, breathless and shivering, he didn't find his flight crew. He found Agent Miller. Special Agent Jack Miller sat in one of the cream-colored leather seats, calmly reading a copy of Forbes magazine with Julian's face on the cover. He looked up as Julian burst in. "Mr. Sterling," Miller said, closing the magazine. "Going somewhere?" "Get off my plane," Julian panted, his chest heaving. "This is private property. You have no warrant. I'll sue you. I'll buy your department and fire you." Miller stood up. He was a large man, and in the confined space of the fuselage, he loomed over the billionaire. "Actually, Mr. Sterling, this plane is no longer your property. As of 20 minutes ago, the SEC froze all assets associated with Sterling Global due to credible evidence of massive fraud. This jet belongs to the taxpayers now." Julian backed away, his eyes darting to the cockpit. "My pilot." "Your pilot is currently giving a statement to my colleagues about your flight plan to the Cayman Islands," Miller said. "Flight risk. That denies you bail, Julian." Julian turned to run back down the stairs, but at the bottom, 4 SUVs had pulled up. A dozen agents stood in the rain, their windbreakers emblazoned with FBI. Julian Sterling stopped. He looked at the agents. He looked at the grey, miserable sky. The roar of a commercial airliner taking off nearby drowned out his scream of rage. But the look on his face, a contorted mask of pure, childish fury, said everything. He dropped the briefcase. It hit the wet tarmac with a dull thud, splashing mud onto his shoes. The King of Steel had fallen. The interrogation. The interview room at the Chicago field office was a sensory deprivation tank designed to break the human spirit. The walls were grey acoustic foam. The table was bolted to the floor. The air conditioning was cranked down to freezing. Andrew sat on the metal chair. Her coat had been taken. She was shivering slightly, but her mind was razor-sharp. She knew how this worked. They would try to intimidate her. They would try to make her feel small. The door buzzed and opened. Agent Miller walked in. He carried 2 coffees. He set one in front of Andrew and sat down. He didn't open a file. He just looked at her. "That was quite a show, Miss Galloway," Miller said. He used her real name. It was a test. Andrew wrapped her hands around the warm paper cup. "It wasn't a show, Agent Miller. It was a public service announcement. You hacked the Chicago emergency broadcast system," Miller said, his voice flat. "You compromised a federal construction site. You caused a stampede that put 3 people in the hospital with broken ankles. Do you have any idea how much trouble you are in?" "I saved thousands of lives," Andrew countered, her voice low. "If that tower had been built, the foundation would have liquefied within 5 years. The subway tunnels underneath would have collapsed during rush hour. How many broken ankles is that, Agent Miller? How many body bags?" Miller leaned back. "Vigilantism isn't a legal defense. You broke the law to prove he broke the law. In the eyes of the Justice Department, you're both criminals." "I am not a criminal," Andrew said. "I am the owner of the intellectual property that Julian Sterling stole. I was retrieving my property and exposing a defect in a government contract." She leaned forward, the chains of her handcuffs scraping the metal table. "Did you look at the drive, Miller? The one I left on the table?" Miller paused. "Our tech guys are scrubbing it now." "Then you know about the back door," Andrew said. The room went silent. Miller's expression shifted. The tough cop veneer cracked just a fraction. "The Meridian Project," Andrew continued, pressing her advantage. "Julian sold the DoD a surveillance grid for the entire Midwest, but he didn't write the code. My father did. And my father didn't trust the government, and he certainly didn't trust Julian. He built a kill switch, a back door that allows anyone with the sequence to shut down the grid, loop the feeds, or crash the servers." Andrew locked eyes with Miller. "I didn't just give you proof of fraud. I gave you the keys to a weapon that Julian Sterling sold to the Pentagon. If that code had gone live next month, any hacker in the world could have walked through that back door and turned off the lights in Chicago. I didn't hack your system to hurt you, Agent Miller. I hacked it to show you that the door was unlocked." Miller stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to get louder. Finally, Miller tapped his earpiece. "Johnson?" "Yeah. Bring it in." The door opened again. A younger agent walked in and handed Miller a tablet. Miller scrolled through the report, his eyes widening slightly as he read the technical analysis. He looked up at Andrew. There was no hostility left in his eyes, only a grudging respect. "The analysis confirms it," Miller muttered. "The code is compromised. The entire Meridian architecture is a block of Swiss cheese. If we had deployed this, it would have been a catastrophe," Andrew finished for him. Miller set the tablet down. He looked at the handcuffs on Andrew's wrists. He looked at the tired woman who had outsmarted a billionaire and the FBI in the same night. "You realize," Miller said quietly, "that technically you are still a hacker." "And technically," Andrew replied, "you need me to patch that hole before the media finds out the Pentagon bought a lemon." Miller smiled. It was a dry, weary smile. "You're bargaining." "I'm offering a consulting service," Andrew corrected, "in exchange for immunity." Miller stood up. He walked to the mirror, stared at his own reflection, then turned back to her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver key. He walked over to Andrew and unlocked the cuffs. "Consultant," Miller tested the word. "I think the director might be open to that. But don't ever make me chase you through a sewer again, Ms. Galloway." Andrew rubbed her wrists. "Deal." The hallway. As Andrew was being escorted out of the holding area to sign her immunity paperwork, the corridor was suddenly filled with shouting. 2 agents were dragging a man down the hall in the opposite direction. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. His hands were shackled to his waist. He was screaming, his face purple with rage. It was Julian. He saw her. He stopped fighting the agents for a split second, his eyes locking onto hers. Andrew stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the hallway, a free woman holding a cup of lukewarm coffee. Julian looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. He didn't see a waitress. He saw the ghost of the man he had killed, standing tall and unafraid. "You're nothing," Julian screamed, spit flying from his mouth as the agents shoved him forward. "You're a servant! You hear me? You're nobody!" Andrew didn't yell back. She didn't get angry. She simply watched him, a look of profound pity on her face. "I'm the woman who poured your wine, Julian," she said softly, though he was already being dragged away. "And I'm the woman who closed your tab." The heavy metal door slammed shut behind him, cutting off his screams. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound Andrew had ever heard. 6 months later, the wind off Lake Michigan was biting, but the crowd gathered on the corner of 4th and Grand didn't seem to mind. The eyesore that had been the empty construction lot, the grave of the failed Meridian Tower, was gone. In its place stood a sleek, 3-story structure made of reclaimed brick and solar glass. It wasn't a skyscraper. It didn't try to scrape the heavens. It was grounded, warm and inviting. A modest bronze plaque by the door read, "The Robert Galloway Institute for Digital Literacy." Andrew stood at the podium. She looked different. Her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders in soft waves. She wore a tailored blazer, not expensive, but professional. She looked like herself. "My father," Andrew spoke into the microphone, her voice amplified across the crowd, "believed that technology should free us, not control us. He believed that the smartest person in the room isn't always the one with the loudest voice or the most expensive suit." The crowd chuckled. In the front row, Michael Ross snapped a photo, giving her a thumbs up. Next to him sat Arthur, the old manager from the Obsidian. He had quit the day after the arrest and now managed the cafe inside Andrew's institute. He looked 10 years younger without the stress of Julian Sterling's dinner orders. "For a long time," Andrew continued, her eyes scanning the faces in the crowd, neighbors, students, former co-workers, "I thought my worth was defined by what I did for a living. I thought I was invisible." She paused, spotting a familiar face at the back of the crowd. Agent Miller was leaning against a lamp post, dressed in civilian clothes. He nodded to her. "But I learned that the truth has a way of being heard, even if it's whispered," Andrew said. "We built this place so that no one in this city has to feel invisible again, so that the next generation has the tools to write their own code, build their own future, and stand up to giants." She picked up a pair of ceremonial scissors. The red ribbon fluttered in the wind. "This is for Robert," she whispered. Snip. The ribbon fell. The crowd cheered. The doors opened, and children from the neighborhood flooded in, running toward the computer labs and the robotics workshop. Andrew stepped off the stage. Michael was waiting for her. "You did good, kid," Michael said, handing her a tablet. "By the way, you might want to see this." Andrew looked at the screen. It was a news article. Sterling Empire liquidated. Former billionaire transferred to Supermax. Below the headline was a photo of Julian, looking haggard and grey, being led into a transport van. And below that, a graph showing the redistribution of his assets, millions of dollars flowing into the Victims' Compensation Fund, into city infrastructure, and into education grants. He wanted to leave a legacy, Andrew mused, looking at the graph. I guess he finally did. He paid for this building, Michael smirked. in a roundabout way. The wine was expensive. Andrew smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. But the tip was worth it. She handed the tablet back to Michael and turned toward the institute. A young girl was waving at her from the window, holding up a soldering iron triumphantly. Andrew Galloway walked toward the door, leaving the cold wind behind her. She had a class to teach. She had a future to build. And for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And that is how a $5,000 bottle of wine and a spilled secret toppled a billionaire. Julian Sterling thought Andrew was just a waitress he could bully. He forgot the golden rule of life. Be careful who you step on your way up, because they might be the ones holding the ladder when you fall. Andrew didn't just get revenge, she got redemption. She proved that dignity isn't about what you wear or how much money you have, it's about what you stand for. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes justice and the ultimate underdog victory, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. What would you have done if you were Andrew? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.